All right, so we've been talking about the Progressive Era amendments. We're going to put in the Prohibition Amendment into this round of specific amendments passed to the Constitution. Remember, the Progressive Era was this period where they're constantly trying to increase efficiency in basically all aspects of American life. That includes factory life or daily life, religious life, all those things. And we also get a period here where the people are trying to regain some power from the monopolists or the extremely rich and figure out a way to balance out and gain some more participation in government. So we talk about the 16th and the 17th Amendments. But for Prohibition, the story is slightly different. Let's go through some of that. So first thing we're going to talk about, and the main goal of this is to talk about the reasons for Prohibition. 4 of them specifically. Alcohol is blamed for destroying families and marriages. The second is religious revival. The third is women's suffrage. And the fourth is the outbreak of World War I. Those 4 things are the reason for Prohibition. We'll go through each of them, and hopefully at the end you'll be able to put them all together and see how the bigger picture plays into the true reasons for Prohibition. So, the first thing you got to do, you should have opened your peardeck slide if you're in my class. It's part of this. You've got to answer this mind map. I want you to start a mind map by drawing or typing anywhere. The reasons for Prohibition. So literally what you'll do is put a box and tell me what Prohibition reason in this one, this one, this one, this one. You're basically putting all 4 reasons for Prohibition on this mind map. So let's talk about the destruction of families and marriages. So at this time in American culture, we have a massive amount of immigrants coming to America. These are German, Irish, Polish, tons of immigrants, let's just put it that way. And they brought with them a culture of drinking alcohol. I gotta stop for a second. Americans too had a culture of drinking alcohol. You go back to the Midwest in this time period where you have whiskey being a main form of currency that's used in Kentucky or Ohio and whatnot. It comes from corn or rye and whatnot. And so you have this product that doesn't spoil. People will turn these grains into alcohol, and then it keeps itself and holds its value over time. And so they use it as a way to trade currency. But as you get new people coming with a different culture of drinking, it sort of changes the way people view alcohol, especially when it's these German and Irish people who some people view as a threat to American democracy. And German and Irish also have a strong Catholic background. And so that plays on previous things we've talked about with Americans being afraid of these immigrants and the cultures they might bring in, even the Catholic Church. Don't forget, the Americans left, or the people who were in America left Europe because the Catholic Church was a problem in their life. So back to the German and Irish. They move into these cities, right? They work in factories all day. Dangerous work conditions, terrible work conditions, long hours. And when they leave, they go spend their local wages at the bar or the pub. This is their way of doling the pain away of the day, the doldrum, long, terrible life in the factory. It's a way for them to kind of get together with their fellow countrymen or friends or coworkers, and they blow off steam by just getting hammered on a regular basis. The problem comes in, though, the more alcohol these guys consumed, it often led to neglect and or abuse of the man's family. The money was already hard enough for these guys to come by, and so then when they were going out, they were wasting it on alcohol, money they should have spent for their kids. And this is also a time when divorce was rare. Women had to live with these abusive men. There was no escaping it. If they got married to someone, they stayed with that someone for fear of ostracization out of their social circles that they may have, or just the fact they may not be able to care for their own families without the help and support of a man. So women were very much stuck in this scenario. I want you to tell me now on this peardeck slide, how did the influx of German and Irish immigrants change the culture? Constant drunkenness led men to what? Men went to saloons and pubs after work. Why was this bad? And then why did women stay with their husbands? I want you to put a little sentence or two connected to each of these. You should be able to add a text box and type your answer in. And then I want you to drag a dot, which on your screen there will be a dot that pops up, You gotta tell me whether you agree or disagree with this statement. Women were doing the right thing by refusing to divorce their drunk husbands. That's a tough one. Think of it maybe in the time period. Don't think of it just based off of today's expectations. Now this picture, I know it's not the best quality, but this is a great picture that kind of sums up the fear of alcohol at this time and what it was doing to families. I would like to point out a few things. If you look at the center of the photo, it's a guy who is reaching back, ready to hit. I'm assuming this is his wife. Underneath his left arm, the one he's grabbing the other woman with, is someone who looks like they're trying to stop him. And then even on his right hip, he's got a little kid reaching up, pulling on his sleeve, trying to stop as well. So this guy's about to beat his wife, and he's got his two kids trying to stop him. So you can see how this is already causing trauma for the children and also trauma for the woman. There's very little items in this house. There's a chair knocked over, a table knocked over, not a lot of stuff in this house, so it kind of already shows the poverty that this family was living in. And then even there's an older looking woman at the door that's begging this guy to stop. And I think the caption under the photo reads something along the lines of like another home destroyed by alcohol or something like that. But you can see how this dude, enraged by alcohol, is just basically destroying his family's life or whatnot. Tell me how you feel about this picture, and then tell me why you feel that way. If you need to go back and look at it again, you can. But I just want you to give me some thoughts about your feelings on this slide, and then maybe what in the picture made you feel that specific way. And try to give me specific examples of things that happened in the picture that relate to your feelings. And again, you can pause while I move on and then answer this question and then pick back up. Now I'm going to leave it up to you. I want you to analyze this cartoon. What does this cartoon tell us about prohibition? The caption under the photo, which is important, reads, "And our shoes and stockings and clothes and food are in there too, and they will never come out." And then if you look at the very top of the picture, it says daddy's in there. So daddy's in there, ... and our shoes and stockings and clothes and food are in there too, and they will never come out. What does this cartoon tell us about prohibition? At this point, you can answer this question. I mean, you can stop, say I need help. If you want to put it over there, you can, and I'll try to visit you when I come back. But answer this question. And let's move on to religious revival. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, many Americans began blaming alcohol for the sins people committed. This was part of a movement called the Second Great Awakening. And it was a new religious movement that takes place, and thousands of people return to church. Some men even take vows to refuse alcohol. They basically are what you'd call temperance crusaders or temperance advocates. The temperance crusade is a different thing, and I'm not entirely sure if I get into that on this, but the temperance crusade was a period where a whole bunch of women in specific towns, it starts in Hillsborough, Ohio, they get together and they go and visit the saloons and basically pray in front of them, but they position themselves directly in front of the doors so that no one can come into the saloon. So they're praying. It's almost like a civil disobedience. But instead of disobedience, they're just sitting there praying, blocking the doors. And it was very acceptable for women to be praying in public at this time. And so they were doing something within the sphere of their domesticity, or what they were allowed to do, or what was socially acceptable, but they're protesting something that they think is destroying their lives and the lives of their children, and to an extent, the lives of Americans. And I guess one more thing, the Second Great Awakening, it's a period in American history that Americans were ripe for change at this point. Or rather, they wanted to regress back to some of the things they knew. If you put yourself in the late 1800s America, you have massive changes occurring. There's changes occurring in technology when we talk about items that can make daily life easier. Factories are growing and booming. There's massive changes as far as people moving into the United States. There's railroads coming about or canals coming about. The world is becoming more connected, and things are changing so fast when only decades before things were not changing at all or very slow. And now all this stuff's changing all of a sudden. And people were struggling with those changes, and they were looking for answers. And one thing that came about is this Great Awakening, and it's basically ministers would go around and preach to people about how, God and whatnot can save the nation and their sins and things, and prevent them from falling into this squalor and poverty and terrible livelihood that they're seeing in the massive cities. And so people were all aboard with that, trying to get some stability in their life from religion. So let's look at this. How does this cartoon relate to the religious revival argument? It says, "Help me to keep him pure. Please vote against the sale of liquors." And it's a mother holding a child. So I want you to tell me how this relates to the religious revival argument. And I think the key word is pure. Let you take that, type out your answer, or think about your answer, and we'll get back to it. Perhaps reason number 3, the most important reason we end up with prohibition are women gaining new rights. We'll specifically talk about the right to vote. But throughout the Progressive era, women begin to demand new rights. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, the WCTU, as you might see them throughout the rest of history, or they'll be abbreviated that way, and the Anti-Saloon League form. And their message is to ban alcohol to protect families, marriages, and end abuse. And the Anti-Saloon League, or ASL, as you'll sometimes see, was not so much blaming alcohol for problems. It was blaming the saloon, the place that alcohol was consumed. And this is a unique take on this because they realize that the saloon offers more to people than just alcohol. It offers that camaraderie, and it's a social circle. In the cities, it even became a political center where a lot of boss politics or politics in cities would take place, where people would go in and they would appeal to the Irish and English immigrants. It was a place that people could go and blow off steam and dole the pain away from the factories. And so they realized that the saloon itself might be an issue, and all the things it represents aside from the alcohol. The alcohol was just something that was consumed in that place. But these people thought, okay, if we can at least knock alcohol out of the saloon, then maybe things will start getting better, and maybe we can even replace the saloon with things that are a little more family friendly. I mean, you could see dance halls or other places pop up at this time, just things that offer better recreation. When the 19th Amendment passes, the women gain the right to vote. And some states had allowed women to vote sooner. I think Wyoming would have been the first that allowed women to vote. And with the help of the women's vote, Prohibition was passed. Here is a picture of I think it's like a WCTU, Women's Christian, WCTU picture. It says, "Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours." So it's women taking a stance that's saying, look, dudes, if you want to date us, you better not be a drinker. Before I get onto this, an increase in women's rights influencing prohibition, women really pushed for this right to vote in a way so that they could have some control politically or about policy and law that allowed them to function in their duties as a wife, okay? You would have this Republican motherhood is the idea that we kind of had talked about more in relation to like the 1776s or 1700s, late 1700s, which just by gaining the right to vote, women were thinking that they could execute their job as being mothers, but they might need to reach out to the federal government, might need to have some say in what actually happens in the federal government so that laws can happen that can make their job possible. And so they use this as a reason why they need to vote. Now, before I jump to World War I would like to point out that the 16th Amendment, the Income Tax Amendment, does give way to prohibition. The point of this is that alcohol sales, the tax from alcohol sales, was a huge source of revenue for the federal government, okay? And the federal government knew that if they prohibited the sale of alcohol, they would not, or rather, they would lose a large portion of the money they use for their budget. So you get rid of alcohol, you can't tax it anymore because no one is legally allowed to sell it, with very rare circumstances maybe where you could. And that's a ton of money the federal government's losing. But the income tax amendment comes along, and it makes prohibition financially possible. They can get rid of the taxes from booze sales, and they can instead replace it with the taxes from the income tax, the 16th Amendment. But the straw that broke the camel's back, right, the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back, was World War I. It was this last little push that added this sense of like American pride and patriotism to World War I that gets the people behind it. It's a powerful tool that you can see politicians using throughout all countries, but getting people to back your nation, or if you can put this to a higher ideal, more than just staying pure for yourself and your family, this higher ideal of the nation and security and fighting for your country, the American public and the politics and the ASL capitalize on this. Because alcohol was strongly associated with Germans. Don't write like me, that G should be capitalized. Since the US was at war with the Germans, it was seen as patriotic to ban alcohol. Also, millions of troops needed the wheat and barley for making food. It was seen as a waste to make beer when the troops needed it so bad. So, first part, if alcohol was closely associated to Germans, that was one reason alone. Like, you don't want to be doing the things that the Germans are doing, the bad guys are doing, don't drink alcohol. But second, maybe more important is, look, we could be using this rye and this wheat and this barley to actually make food for our troops who are eating overseas or who need these things to fight and secure our nation. And I like this cartoon. It says, will you back me or back booze? I vote yes for prohibition. And you can see it's a U.S. troop. He's got USA on in the satchel in front of him, and he's pointing, almost like the Uncle Sam picture, I want you, right? He's pointing and asking the Americans' call to action to help him fight against the bad guys. And if you even notice, this is the Ohio Dry Federation. Ohio has a strong history in this prohibition movement in the Anti-Saloon League. The Anti-Saloon League, I believe, started in Westerville, Ohio, which is just outside of Columbus. So Ohio is very key and instrumental in this temperance crusade and eventual push to prohibition. All right, a few questions for you. One major influence on prohibition was that the troops fighting in World War I needed wheat, barley, and other ingredients found in beer in order to eat. Is that true or false? You tell me. Second, people were encouraged to consume beer because the Germans were fighting in World War I. Key word is encouraged. People were encouraged to consume beer because the Germans were fighting in World War I. Answer. Can you explain how a religious revival, World War I, and women's suffrage contributed to prohibition? For this, you can choose whichever, and if you need help, click it. I'll come back when I'm here and I can help you out. And lastly, we're going to take a look at the 18th Amendment. There's two main sections here we're going to talk about. Basically, the first part says after 1 year of ratification, so they give the beer makers and people 1 year to adjust, right? The manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within the U.S. and the territory for beverage purposes is hereby prohibited. Notice that there is no word in there that prohibits drinking liquor. I think that's interesting. You can't manufacture it, you can't sell it, and you can't transport it. But it says nothing about drinking it. Obviously, how could you drink it without transporting it from somewhere? How could you drink it if it's not even manufactured? And I mean, I guess if someone else happened to manufacture it, how could they sell it? All those things that essentially they're telling you can't drink it, but they're not telling you can't drink it. They're just telling you can't make it, sell it, or move it. Tell me. And the second thing here that I think is interesting is it says Congress and the several states shall have concurrent power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Concurrent, you can think of it meaning as they're both responsible for enforcing it. Congress and the states have to enforce this. That ends up being an issue. Because the states are saying, hey, hold on a second, you want us to enforce this? We don't have the money or the police force or the people to do this. And the federal government is letting them do these things. And so you kind of get to this weird spot where no one's really enforcing anything, or people are crooked and not enforcing it at all. And so it's kind of this piece where some states are just like, nah, we're not really doing that. Or some cities are like, yeah, no, we're not going to mess with that. It's not worth our time. And so Some people are enforcing it, some aren't. And it's just this period where you don't know what exactly is going to happen if you get caught with alcohol. It depends on who catches you or if anyone's even looking for you. So in your own words, summarize the 18th Amendment. I'll pause so you can do that or give you a second. I've already went over this slide. I would like you to go look through it again just to read through it and make sure you have got it down so you can pause it and do that. Section 2 as well. Both of them are enforcing the law. These two things are important for you to understand and know. And then lastly, what do you think? Is there any way this amendment violates any part of the U.S. Constitution? What do you think? What problems might the United States have due to the prohibition of alcohol? What issues might come out of this? You might know some of them off the top of your heads. I mean, you make alcohol something that was very much important to a bunch of immigrant groups living in the U.S. You make it illegal now. They may still want to do this. So you might have a perfect time for gangsters or bootleggers to come about and sell it to these people who still want it, and they can make a quick buck, and it's not getting taxed. How confident are you that you can identify and analyze the 4 factors that led to prohibition? You choose one. If it's a question or a concern, I'll find you and we'll talk about it. And I believe there is a link. Down at the bottom to a Newsy LA assignment. If you click on that, it should take you, oops, not the peardeck one. If you click on that link, it keeps taking me to peardeck. I think you guys will be able to click on that link and it'll take you to a News ELA article. And you can do this News ELA article, read it, and answer the questions that go along with it.